I have a simple mission on today's program. It's to give you permission regarding the border crisis in Texas to feel genuine Christian compassion for children and to feel genuine frustration, even outrage, with the Obama administration and their contempt for the rule of law. This is the voice of resistance.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
The doctor is in, and I'm here to tell you, you're not crazy. You're not crazy. If you are feeling conflict inside of you as you watch what's going on the southern border, as you see the images of children and women, especially unaccompanied children, as you hear the horrific news now that dead bodies of children are washing up on shore in the Rio Grande. If you feel a sense of frustration, maybe even anger towards the Obama administration, and part of you is saying, we've got to protect these kids, and part of you is saying, we've got to send these kids back, and part of you wants to just scream your lungs out at Eric Holder and President Obama, you're not crazy. These are actually a sign that you're healthy. So to assess your health and to hopefully bring some wisdom based upon Mosaic biblical principles, let me give you some backdrop and then hopefully apply these thoughts. Now, I said Mosaic biblical principles because I think that history proves, and if the scriptures are true, then certainly it would be true, that it's hard to have a better idea than God, right? If God gives us commands and gives us statutes and principles, it would be a fool that says, I'm wiser than God. I can come up with a better idea than that. So, setting aside the discussion of which parts of the Old Testament are still applicable today and which parts have been done away with by the New Testament, a huge discussion, I might add. Setting that aside, I want to focus for a few minutes on the crisis in Texas, the crisis this is becoming for all Americans, and look at it, at least in part, through the grid of biblical law. And by the way, for those of you who want some good fodder to tell your friends who aren't sure if they're believers that Mosaic law really was inspired by God, just look at the health laws. Look at the health laws. The Mosaic health laws showed that they were inspired by God because no one knew about germs back then. But God said, for example, when an army traveled, each man had to have his own sword and his own trowel, a little hand shovel, so that he could bury his human waste, which would keep disease down. Or that when someone was sick, they were not to be touched. And if they were touched, then the person who touched them had to wash 7 times, washing away germs. Somebody who was dead from a certain disease, they had to be buried quickly. People were not supposed to touch them because of the disease that would spread. These are just a few quick illustrations to show that long before medical doctors understood the nature of disease and biology and how diseases are spread, God knew. And he told the Jews. And the Jews, by the way, during some of the great plagues that swept across Europe and killed hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people, the Jews were by and large left untouched because they were following Mosaic law. All right? So, back to Mosaic law and the crisis in Texas. I apologize for that rabbit trail. According to Mosaic law, open borders are the norm. I repeat, open borders are the norm. Now, let me explain the caveats of that. If somebody from one of the surrounding nations wanted to emigrate into Israel, wanted to come to work or whatever, they were allowed to come, but there were no freebies. There was no compulsory redistribution of wealth under Mosaic law. So they weren't coming to get free stuff. All right, that's number one. Number two, they were not granted voting rights. And that's a critical distinction. They were not granted voting rights. The ability to pick the leaders happened at the gate in the various communities, and it was only the Israelites themselves who were in relationship with God, who had their boys circumcised, who were participating in the rites and the rituals of the law of Moses. Only they could vote. So if you just look at those two issues, you don't get to vote when you come in, and you don't get to have free stuff because of the redistribution of wealth forcefully. You understand that what a hole that punches in Obama's agenda? I mean, the facts are out there. There are Democrats especially who want voting rights granted to all of these illegal immigrants. Why? Because those people are going to continue to vote for free stuff. Don't you see the incestuous relationship of what's going on here? Now I've got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to continue with this, delve into a little bit more, and talk about children. And the surprise visit, it's more than a visit. The guess who's coming for dinner in Nebraska? Yeah, Nebraska. My wife's from Nebraska. I'll be right back.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah?
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
If you have a mommy's heart, a daddy's heart, a grandma or grandpa's heart, I think it's safe to say that if somebody brought a child to you, whether that child is a year old and in diapers, barely able to walk, or 3 years old and just barely potty trained and can hardly talk, speaks another language, and they said, will you please help us care for this child temporarily? That either A, you would do it, or B, you would find someone who would do it. I mean, God help us if our hearts are hardened to children. The book of James says that true religion and undefiled before God and the Father is to help the fatherless and the widow in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. That's true Christianity. That's true religion. So here's where this becomes like a Rubik's Cube, all crazed up of principles that are pulling at one another and don't seem to line up. For example, in Nebraska, the federal government, without telling the governor of the state, brought 200 unaccompanied minors to the state of Nebraska. And where did they go? They went with family members or sponsors. There was no breakdown if there were like 4 cousins that helped with the children and 196 families from a local adoption agency. There was no breakdown of the stats, but it meant that primarily these are not relatives of children, but these are people with a compassionate heart. And thank God for people with compassionate heart. But it's very possible, I believe likely, that politically what's going on is that Obama is using these children as a human shield, like Saddam Hussein did. And for those of you who thought, wait a minute, I know that image, why do I know that? You're not familiar with the history from the early 90s, and then again in the early 2000s. What Saddam Hussein did was he placed himself with children around him constantly and took pictures of them so that if the Allied forces tried to kill him, they would knowingly be killing all of those children. So it was a way for him to protect himself. a very immoral way, I might add. And I think that there's a strong argument that Obama and his administration are using children as a political human shield, because as the media begins to focus on the plight of these children, the more that people cry out for the border to be secured and for these people to be deported, the more they will look like the cruel, uncompassionate, unkind people, and it shields Obama from the political fallout. All right? That's what I mean by Obama using these children as a human shield. And we have to be careful. I mean, that's that Rubik's Cube. Talk about all these principles in conflict. But when you bring 200 children to a state and don't let people know that they're coming, this has the cruelty on some level of maybe this is a bad comparison, but slightly accurate. There were actually people, there was one crusade that was a children's crusade where they let children go first, thinking that because the children were so pure, they would be able to fight and not die. That turned out to be a colossal mistake, all right? It was horrible. Obama is in great political trouble because of this. It's actually, it's no longer a no-lose situation for him. And the reason is this: we're a nation of laws. Obama swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America. And he's starting to skate on really thin ice. There's no question that the word is out throughout Central America that if children make it across the border, they're going to be housed, they're going to be fed, they're going to receive medical attention, and they're going to be kept here for the foreseeable future. And I agree, by the way, with every voice that said, you just can't send them back on the death train. You can't even just fly into another country and drop them at the airport and say they're your problem, because for some of these children, it would mean imminent danger and, God forbid, perhaps death. So we see the crisis brewing before us, and how Obama and his minions are successfully exploiting these children while at the same time helping them. So I think that one of our fallback positions, that is not just a fallback, but it's got to be foundational, from which we do not depart, is that at the end of the day, these 12, soon 13 million illegal immigrants must not be given the right to vote. All right? Look at what your adversary wants. Figure out the end game of the adversary. It's so that the laws of the United States, through its elected officials, will be determined by this soon-to-be created voting bloc if Obama gets his way. So now that we know that that's what they want, we say, all right, we're going to deal with this humanely. We're going to. But we're not going to ever let these people vote. Ever. Because that's what you want. You're trying to skew the entire political process. And we can look at it based upon Mosaic law. All right? Again, you show compassion to the foreigner. They have to obey the laws of Israel when they're there. They were not allowed to worship idols. All right? They had to follow the God of Israel. And they were not allowed to vote for the representatives. So we can have that as a sort of a compassionate and just way to undo this Rubik's Cube, so that we're not monsters in dealing with the widow and the orphan, but we're also not politically stupid, committing political suicide by letting the fate of this country be in the hands of people who have overrun our border illegally with the wink and the nod of this disastrous president. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. Now, at the beginning of the program, I set out to give you permission to be compassionate to the children, to these single moms that are coming over, obviously desperate because they're willing to risk their lives and willing to risk the lives of their children. To be compassionate to them, but to be frustrated and even angered with the Obama administration. All right, so now what do you do? What do you do with your compassion and your frustration and your outrage? Well, take your pick. You could contact local authorities and say, I am completely opposed to what President Obama is doing, but if there is a child who needs a safe haven, we will offer that safe haven. Now, some people say, well, hold on, if you do that, you're just letting Obama win. No. There are some things that are bigger than Obama. This has to do with our fear and love of God, and that these human beings, most of them baptized Christians, are made in the image of God. Okay? So, believe me, I'm not caving into Obama, and here's how you know. Go ahead and take your outrage and your frustration and use the tools that we have been giving you on this program to become a public advocate against Obama and against the Democratic minions in the House of Representatives and in the Senate who are trying to overthrow the Republic by allowing our border to be overrun. All right? How would you do that? Go to our website and look for the episode. There'll be a link up at the top that tells you how to do a demonstration or a press conference or hold an event that the media will cover and will get your voice out. But I'm going to go a step further. Remember, I talked about broadcasting is big, and that's why we do some of these events, and microcasting is small. And this one's going to be tough for you. You ready? To go ahead and wag your finger with a smile if you want. I warned you. Or with sharp, frustrated eyes, I warned you. To your friends, to your relatives, to your neighbors, to the people that you go to church with. And say, if you voted for Obama, you bear responsibility for what is happening to our country right now. Just picture yourself saying it in conversation, in blogs, in letters to the editor, in local call-in radio shows if you've got them in your community. Start to work on the lines that those of you who gave Obama the ride to the White House in 2008 and then again in 2012, you gave him the reins of our federal government, at least at the presidential level. And what he is doing right now to help undermine and fundamentally alter this republic is your fault because you helped this man get into office. All right? So now that's looking back. And then the third thing that you can do is to look forward. Get off your couch and get registered to vote and get active in politics in your area. Find a good Tea Party group. Find a good pro-life group. Find a good pro-marriage group that's actually politically active and politically savvy, okay? Not people sitting around having a meeting just witching at one another, but people who are out there collecting signatures, going door to door to help get people elected, that are at the fairs handing out political literature. The country is dying because our civil leaders are driving this ship of state to the jaws of hell, literally. And the only way that we're going to come out is if we switch the leaders of the ship of state. We've got to get new people in office. And it's going to take a higher level, in my opinion, than ever before of intensity, of a shrill voice. Remember we talked about that? That if the house is on fire, you don't come in and say, hey, by the way, I love what you've done with the flowers. And that place setting is gorgeous. By the way, there's a really severe fire going on in the basement right now that's probably going to consume the whole house. But anyway, and this wallpaper is gorgeous. No, you come up saying, the house is on fire! Okay? The bread in circuses, cyber hell, cyberspace has so numbed most people that you have to have a rhetorical sledgehammer, wham, to wake them out of their stupor and their political and cultural and spiritual coma, okay? And it means that you're going to run the risk of alienating people. And as I said to you before, it means you're going to run the risk of having people hate you, despise you, cast your name out as evil, all the things that Jesus spoke about. So it's time now to really say, God, what do you want me to do? To look in the mirror and say, God, what do you want me to do? You have permission to show compassion. You have permission from the laws of God and from the laws of reason to feel frustration and to feel anger. But now you need to employ them to help right the ship of state before we perish as a free people. It's up to you. I have been a leader in the pro-life movement for 30 years. And sadly, we have not prevailed in our goal to make it a criminal act to kill an unborn baby. There's reasons why we have failed. I wrote this book, A Humble Plea, to Catholic bishops, to evangelical clergy, and to lay people, explaining where we went wrong and what we have to do to prevail. We've made this available as a PDF online for free. I encourage you to go and download your own copy. We have put together what we call an online university for you. Now that's a highfalutin way of saying that we have a pretty significant library of material, books, tapes, videos that are there for you for free. Why are we doing this? Because America is desperate for new leaders, and because this material could help you to become the leader that you and God want you to be. Check it out and enjoy it. It is better to have an ambitious plan than none at all. Sir Winston Churchill. The odds are that the reason you watch this program is because you want to follow the news, but you also want to know what to do or what things you might do. So just dealing with this border crisis, I want to encourage you to take a couple of simple steps, all right? Number one, if you're watching this on television, go to our website, voiceofresistance.com, and find this episode or similar ones like it, the one on how to do a demonstration. Get a link and send it to your pastor. Send it to your friends. Send it to people that you think might want to start a small group of fellow advocates who want to take action. And invite them to act. We've got a Rubik's Cube, we've got a mess, okay? There's all these principles that are in conflict. But I think that this program and the messages that we can see from the scriptures will help us to straighten out and put together some of these principles in such a way that we're not just sitting there wringing our hands while our southern border is overrun, while our families are being overrun by the militant homosexual movement, while our millions of babies are being brutally murdered chemically and surgically by abortion. I mean, we don't have to just sit here and wring our hands, people. So I'm inviting you to take action and to invite your friends to take action. And please understand, all of the training materials, everything that we have for you at our website is free, okay? This is not a business for us. This is certainly not a money-making proposition. This is to help equip you to be a part of a righteous vanguard that brings our nation back to justice and righteousness under God.